Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today we're discussing the incredible sound work behind Sinners, director Ryan Coogler's wild vampire thriller, which we're hearing quite a lot about in this year's Oscar season. It's one of the 10 films that's been shortlisted for a Best Sound Academy Award this year. So I'm delighted to welcome back to the show Supervising Sound Editor Benny Burtt, sound designer and re-recording mixer Steve Boeddeker, and re-recording mixer Brandon Proctor. They were all nominated for Academy Awards for their work on Ryan Coogler's Black Panther. Also joining us in the conversation today is production sound mixer Chris Welcker, who really had his work cut out for him on this film, which you're going to hear more about in our conversation. So, being a huge fan of Ryan Coogler's films, I was so excited to see this movie when it came out in the spring, but I really wanted to avoid spoilers, so I went in totally blind, having not read a thing about it. So, you can only imagine my surprise at about 45 minutes in when I realized, wait, there's vampires in this movie? But it is so much more than that. It's a total genre cocktail. It's a horror movie, a period piece, a musical, a gangster thriller film, and somehow it all comes together as one seamless movie unlike anything we've ever seen. So that's exactly where I wanted to start today's conversation, by asking the team if Ryan had an overall sound philosophy to guide them. What were those initial conversations that they had with him about what he wanted to do with the sound of the film? Here's Supervising Sound Editor Benny Burtt.
I mean, one of the wonderful things about working with Ryan is he often he trusts the people he works with, and so he gives us a lot of freedom right out the gate. We'll have conversations and discuss real general vague things, and if there's anything he wants us to work on, he'll let us know. But he gives us a ton of freedom to kind of experiment and try whatever we want, and kind of, he comes with a fresh, there's a blank canvas, so we can just kind of come with whatever we want, see how it reacts, and then we'll kind of go from there. And there's a bit of back and forth and collaborations, ultimately ending up where we want to go. But it's definitely a collaborative process working with him back and forth.
He gives us a lot of freedom to do whatever we want to do, but also a lot of freedom to emotionally feel the impact of the first cut and decide for ourselves what direction it's going in. My secret weapon with Ryan movies has always been Ludwig, because whatever Ludwig is doing, he was doing with Ryan. And so you can tell emotionally where they were headed with a certain scene. And so we kind of want to make sure that our stuff kind of blends with his. For me, at least, when I first saw the cut of it, I realized there was a lot of story about contrasts. The contrast between day and night, which of course is important for a vampire movie. The contrast between the wealthy and the beat down. The contrast between them trying to have the time of their life, and then all of a sudden it gets cut short. So with keeping that kind of thing in mind, we kind of built up some of the beginning part of the movie very realistic. It was full and lush, and huge credit to Benny for getting all these period vehicles, which Ryan said he wanted to sound bigger because he thought that they would be intimidating to people at that time period. But we kind of built up this reality and this reality and this reality until it became a hyper reality, and then it goes into surreal. So that just became kind of apparent as you watch it.
When we first started shooting this movie, Ryan and Ludwig had a meeting with all the actors and with the sound team and the music team, and he brought us in to kind of share a sort of a perspective going into this project. He talked about his time with his uncle and his inspiration for this film, and he talked about the genre of this music and the people, and the lives that they lived in that time period, and also about the recordings that we have today of these people and their music, and how they were working with the technology of the time and the techniques of the time. And he thought that this would be a great opportunity to showcase this genre in a way that could embrace the technology that we have today, and to utilize things even like Dolby Atmos and the recording techniques that we have available to us to kind of give it the full treatment of the current times. And ultimately, I think the idea would be that the audience would get a real immersive cinematic kind of experience of this genre of music that it doesn't really exist outside of something like this movie.
I mean, Steve, you brought up the music and having Ludwig's stuff kind of very early on, and I that's obviously a huge part of the film was the work that Ludwig had done, even for pre-records on set and for the live performances as well. We had Ludwig and Serena Goranson on the podcast a few months ago, and they gave us some really just amazing stories about the process of recording the music live on set. But for Chris, for you, I mean, that must have presented some interesting challenges for the production sound recording to integrate all that live music recording on set.
We thought a lot about, with the idea of immersion, we thought, well, doing everything based off of pre-records would it has that effect of taking the audience sort of out of that space, and so they really wanted to kind of make these live records, and that's a real big challenge. You deal with things like, first of all, it starts with the performer. So when you talk about actors and choosing the right actor for these kinds of roles, you have to have somebody. You're creating these characters that have, that are legends in their region for their ability to perform, and so if you take an actor who they can do their best, but if they've started practicing this instrument 3 months in advance, there's just no way to do that. So they went to these great lengths to find actors like Miles Caton, who plays Sammy, who he was a real performer working with the group Her. They got for the trio of vampires, they had Peter Drymanis, who was one of the guys in the trio, and then Lola Kirk, and both of them are performing musicians, probably primarily, and they have crossed over into the world of acting. And we had Perline, played by Jamie Lawson, who she sang her part on the song Pale Pale Moon, and so how you have all these people that are coming together that have the ability to actually perform, and then there's the challenges of now taking the genre of music and the time period of the 1930s, where we don't have the benefit of amplification. We have acoustic instruments. We have, the things that we deal with on location, like the heat and the humidity, things like that, and the effects that has on stringed instruments and keeping those things in tune, because we're not just recording vocals, we're recording, guitars, and we're recording violins, banjos, things like that, harmonicas. And so they present a lot of challenges, and I think the thing is it just took a lot of dedication from the sound crew and from the music crew and the actors, and it all stemmed from Ryan and Ludwig, prioritizing that, and that's what allowed us to take the extra time to do it right, and to make sure that when we rolled the camera, we were all ready, the performers were ready, the sound was ready, and it just went from there. That just kind of became the overall philosophy of how we approached this.
So that all sounds really nice, Chris. But when you get into the details on this, I'm sure that this was not as easy as you make it sound. I'm thinking about that. Look at
my head.
Yeah, there you go.
I had hair before this movie started. So yeah.
I'm thinking about that one of those first sequences.
He had AC.
I'm thinking about one of those first sequences with Sammy, and Stack in the car. They're driving, and Sammy pulls out the guitar and he starts singing "Traveling." And it's like, conceptually, it's such a simple scene, but I'm looking at that and I'm saying, like, an open air convertible, a gravel road, this period car, and it's a live performance. So let's pop the hood on this. Tell us, like, how did you capture that?
Well, you and me both. I had that same thought, but of course that was brought to me like at the interview with Ryan about this job, and at that stage, I was just saying yes, 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 but in my head I was saying, oh shit. So we got started pretty quickly. We had about 2 weeks of prep, and a big part of that was building systems with our equipment that could handle all the variety of things that we were talking about doing, knowing that we didn't have a set plan all the time, but we wanted to have options, and we wanted to be able to respond in the moment and change, the approach to, sometimes we would go in thinking the night before. Ludwig would say, I think that we're going to use the pre-records on this. And it's like, well, why would we do that? Because we thought that we were going to do this all live. And, it might have been a confidence thing the night before, but then he and Serena talked the actors up. And then the next day it's like, we're going to go live. And it's like, okay, great. And that's like a completely different approach to it. But that all was, because of that 2-week prep. And also the fact that we had just come off of a big music project before this. We had done the movie Spinal Tap 2. So we were really primed and ready to do big music shows. And we just went right into into Sinners with no time off. And so that 2 weeks basically became get a car that's period appropriate, drive it down the gravel road, put an actor in that car playing a guitar, and see, with the cameras rolling, how can we do this, and use that time to troubleshoot. So then we started thinking creatively about mic placements. We, in certain situations, we would be able to use the fact that the car had the hood down, the roof down. It gave us the ability to now utilize boom mics with big wind protection over the top of the actors, and then we could, of course, hide things in the footwell of the car to get closer perspectives to the mic. Get the mic closer to the guitar. Things like that. And so it was just a throw everything at it and try to capture as much as we can. And then really working with, we had Felipe Pacheco, who was our music editor, and he was with us all the time. And so we could work in tandem with him to make sure that as a music editor, he felt like he could work with the material that we were capturing. And if there was ever a question of that, then we would sort of like rethink the approach.
Yeah, it was great having Felipe there because he could immediately take the recordings immediately and start working with them to make sure that they would work in the picture. It worked how Ryan and Ludwig wanted it to work. And if there wasn't something that was going how it's supposed to or how they wanted to go, they could adapt and find a solution and figure it out and go back and get what they needed.
Benny, we even had so many pre-production meetings. We actually did that test where, Chris, you guys recorded and sent it to us, and we examined it in advance before even shooting. And even like traveling, it's shot over 3 days, Chris?
3 days over the course of a month.
Right. So then you have the cars traveling at different speeds. You have different noise that you're having to deal with. You have, there's all the proximity that you're dealing with, Chris, but then there's also like, it had to be denoised in certain ways. Chris would, Felipe would send stuff to David Butler to have him look at stuff for, denoising, and he'd send it back to him. We'd have to add noise, from Benny and Steve Boeddeker to try to get, the consistency to sound the same between these takes and to make it sound like a seamless take. But it is starting from all those 3 days over a course of a month of recording.
Chris, there's another sequence that I love, which is when Stack and Sammy meet Delta Slim at the Clarkdale train station, and then they, that song starts and kind of the whole crowd gets into it. And you talked about, with a couple months prep, an actor is not going to become like a virtuoso on some of these. Delroy Lindo is an amazing actor, but he's not a professional harmonica player. He's not going to get that great, just prepping for a few weeks. So I love the story about how that sequence came together. Can you talk about it?
Sure. Yeah, that's a perfect example of some of the creative kind of decision making that changed, in the moment, literally the morning of sometimes. We went to bed thinking that train station sequence was going to be playback of Delroy's harmonica. We built a Pro Tools session that had in-ears for the actors. We had the stem recording of a pre-record of a harmonica, and we were going to at least have Miles, who plays Sammy, we were going to have his vocals and guitar be live in that space while the harmonica was pantomimed. But then we show up to work that day, and Ludwig and Serena bring in this blues legend, Bobby Rush, who's in his 90s, and he's walking out in this big floral kind of Hawaiian shirt to set, and they basically say, "Hey, we have this kind of crazy idea. We think we would like to have." We'd like to have Bobby Rush actually perform the part for Delroy, and we would like to have him on set. And you can record his performance and Sammy's performance, but that way, Delroy could actually look at him and pantomime his harmonica playing. And the coolest thing about that is like, great, this is amazing. Like, the benefits to us is that it gave us separation of the instruments, because now we could space them out much further apart than they actually would have been, which helps with, isolation of the microphones and those instruments to those mics. And then the other thing is it allowed it to then go back to that, the previous point that it did what I think the blues genre is, what's inherently important about that genre, which is just the raw feel, of the music. And we didn't have to lock it to a tempo of a pre-record. It was now improvised live on set. We had this man playing the harmonica and we didn't know what he was going to play, and neither did Delroy. And he's just literally watching him and performing live on set. And it's like gold. And once we figured that worked, we actually did that a couple other times for Delroy, because he, not only is he a harmonica player as Delta Slim, but he's supposed to be this, amazing pianist in the area. And this scene actually didn't make the movie, but they're in the deleted scenes. If you rent the movie or purchase the movie, there's this one particular scene where he's singing and he's playing piano to the crowd while Sammy is kind of getting to know Perline in the bar before he gets his big moment. And it's really cool. But what was interesting from a sound perspective and the recording side of it is we brought in a second piano and had his piano coach basically sitting just outside of the frame. He's playing the piano. We're recording his piano in stereo, and we're recording Delta Slim's vocals as they're happening live. And again, they just had that ability to just kind of improvise. And it's funny because he even says in the scene, he says like, one more time, like as if, like he's like, you do it again. But, it just was pretty funny to see that, but it worked so well together. But there's so many situations in this movie that are just like that.
One of the things I really like about the track on the film is that you guys established pretty early on that you're going to use the sound design in sometimes a very impressionistic way. And Steve, you talked about it being literal at the beginning and then getting more impressionistic as you go through, and certainly by the juke joint. But I'm thinking about like earlier on, there's a scene where they're driving down the road and Delta Slim tells that story about Rice getting lynched. And it was really interesting that you guys bring in snippets of dialogue and sound effects from that lynching and kind of play it kind of low key under the story that he's telling. And I'm just so I was so struck by that particular sequence. So I'm curious, did Ryan script it that way? Was that something that you guys came up with in post, or kind of how did that whole approach to telling that story come together?
Well, we actually took multiple approaches to this like sound design for it. And this is one of those classic examples where less is more ended up being the best, because Benny and David Hughes and we all did like esoteric and hits and low end swells and things like that to try to give it like more impact. And it ended up taking away, because you're listening to it and you're going, what is that? And so Benny had cut this whole radio play for what he's actually talking about. And so I mixed that in with like a lot of reverb to try to make it dreamy and distant, but it still had this feeling of like, what is that? And it was only when we stripped away everything and we just took Benny's radio play and the dialogue snippets and just played them really low and bone dry that it attached to his story, and it kept you focusing on what he was saying. And then, you just take the gravel and the engine stuff and you peel it way, 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 way back so that you just focus as much as possible and then bring it back in later.
And it wasn't originally scripted the way it turned out, but it was, Ryan's idea to do this. So it was written into the film. But as far as like the placement of the dialogue, which was actually all the loop group, players, and the effects, we recorded those loop group, players later in the process during the final, and then placed those. And then Benny and Steve placed around the sound design that incorporates it. And then the music was trying to get us into the section. But, like Steve says, it was kind of difficult. First, we thought we'd make it dreamy to try to distance it from the real, on screen film. And it just didn't have, it took away from, Delta and the story. And once we made it mono and dry and just really supported the story, which was obviously the most important part that was happening on screen, is when it actually kind of locked in. But again, such a simple, it sounds like we just kind of like put it in, made it mono and just did it. And it was incredibly difficult and so fragile. It was like any moment, like talk about pulling, a thread, every little moment in that, it would just take you out of it and make it feel not as important as it actually really was, because that story was so important and had such heart behind it and was such a, so much power that it was so easy to kind of destroy it with sound, to be honest.
It wasn't in the script, and it was, like Brandon said, it was kind of an idea that Ryan threw out there during the final that we kind of slowly worked on in the backgrounds. And we toy around with it. Is it working? Is it not? And I think we put it in for the big studio playback and got some mixed response. And so like, honestly, it kind of came and went a couple different times. And we actually put it back in. I think one of the last things we did was put that in right before we print mastered. Because it's such a delicate spot there. Delroy is doing such a great job telling that monologue and relating that story, but also just we're trying to use this story to kind of help tie in the memories that are haunting him, and what motivates him. Part of him is blues.
It reads as if we're hearing what he's remembering, and it's just a really it's a lovely moment. Tell me a little bit about the town. I love that street scene when we meet Bo and Grace, and I understand that Ryan's concept was that there was a black side of the street and a white side of the street. So, and obviously a lot of cars, a lot of vehicles, a lot of like that. There's a lot going on from a sound perspective. So, Benny, like, what was it? How did you approach that? How did you start to build that? And
Well, yeah, so we started out with wanting to just, have a differentiation between the two sides of the street. And so like, we started out in Bo Chow's shop, and it's a little bit more sparse, dead. There's not as much activity. Wood floors are a little creakier. It's just not a lot going on. And also from that side of the street, we hear more horse and cart and wagon type sounds outside the store. And then we cross to the other side, the white side, and it's busier. There's a lot of automobiles. There's a cash register, ka-ching, plenty of activity in the store. And then, of course, we recorded some loop group, and, there's some characters in there that, are making clear their feelings on the people across the street. But it all happens real quickly. So if you're not looking for it, it's easy to miss. But there's also plenty of visual stuff in that shot that are pretty cool. If you're not looking for them, you'll miss them. After, smoke comes in, and they're talking about the guy being shot down the street. They give a guy, one of the store clerks, money to go get the doctor across the street. And as we're following Grace to the other side, we see the other guy come back with a doctor and point out the injured guy. It's just, it's a pretty cool sequence. Lots happening.
The interactivity between Smoke and Stack is so striking in the movie. I got to say, like, after a few minutes, I kind of just forgot that it was Michael B. Jordan playing both sides of those sequences, because the interactivity is so strong, and obviously his performance is so amazing. But Chris, I understand that you kind of developed a way to help him with his performance, because he's having to play both sides of those sequences. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that kind of just evolved with Michael B. We again in that 2-week prep, that was another big technical hurdle that we had to kind of address and figure out how we would accomplish that. And they started doing some tests where they were handing a cigarette back and forth between Michael B. Jordan and a physical, another person who was a stand-in, basically, that would basically do the actions of the opposing twin for him to be able to work alongside. When we got into that prep, we started to, it was like they were thinking, well, how are we going to hand off the cigarette and know when the cigarette from the previous take is at the right mark? And they started trying to use video monitors with the previous footage overlaying on top of the current shot, and thinking like, well, we'll just put it just outside of the frame and he can just kind of like look at the screen, and when he sees himself hand the cigarette over, he'll grab it. And then it just didn't really seem like that was the best approach for a number of reasons. And the whole time we're as the sound department, that was a scene where we could have gone to craft services, when they're doing that kind of stuff. But we started thinking like, well, we're here and we have all these, ideas on like how the playback capabilities that we have could be maybe useful. What if we used audio beeps? So like essentially like taking ADR cues and inserting them in the right place to signify, 3, 2, 1 handoff of cigarette, or like I'm going to walk up to this, to my mark, and we both, we want both twins to hit their mark at the same time. So the actor lands at the mark at 3, 2, 1 land. And so we started talking to the VFX department and Ryan and Autumn, and I found a device that basically takes the electronic pulse that the video playback operator was using to start this techno dolly, this super techno dolly thing that is essentially like a repeatable crane and head combination that gives the ability for having more dynamic shots of something and then repeating that move over and over again. And so I took that signal, and I could then have my playback operator's Pro Tools session start at the same time as the camera move. So we would take the audio from the video effects person, the video assist person, and we would drop that into the Pro Tools session. We would remove any audio that we wanted to remove, and then insert any kind of ADR beeps at the right place, at the right time. And then we put a speaker out on set, and then that's how, they were responding to Michael B's previous performance of dialogue and things like that. Well, then once we started doing that, we found some, Michael B really was kind of coming to us, and he's like, so here's the thing, like the stand-in guy who's saying my lines as the previous twin, the timing that he's doing just doesn't feel right. It's like I'm kind of compressing the amount of time that I would like to take for this thing. Is there any way that we could pre-record my dialogue of the opposing twin and somehow play that back? And we were like, yeah, we could do that. And so, funny enough, you should ask. I have, I have here this little. It's like basically a sample. It's a MIDI controller. But I've pre-recorded Michael B. Jordan's lines when we were on set, and so I could then
keep an eye on them till they leave.
I could have his pre-recorded lines, and so I'm watching this, the scene on my video monitor.
Who set us up? You think they bought company? Shit, we ain't. You think
you know what I mean?
You think they bought
so
company?
Basically, in doing that, I was mixing with my left hand. I was triggering playback cues with my right hand, and I had the script on my iPad with a foot controller that I'm using with my right foot, and trying to keep the script moving so that I could, follow along with the actors. And I'm basically triggering Michael B. Jordan's pre-recorded dialogue at the right time. It was a lot. There were a couple takes where I was like, oh shit, I hit the wrong button, but. Eventually, it worked out really well, and it gave Michael B. the ability to have the exact timing that he envisioned for his character, and that's sort of something that we started doing more and more. And then, of course, it was like, well, can you do that while we're doing the driving work as well? Which we're completely untethered from this car. We're like in a van following along, and it's just like, it's just a real head scratcher. But yeah, we did whatever he asked. We tried to make it happen, and I think it really helped in a lot of ways.
Can I get one?
Chris, where can I get that thing, and can I get preloaded with all those lines?
I know I want to get one of those Michael B. samples as my ringtone for when Benny calls me.
Yeah, it's like the Michael B. Jordan in your pocket, the smoke and stack in your pocket.
So, I mean, a lot of the movie was also shot with IMAX cameras, which are kind of notoriously noisy. I saw this morning a quote from Matt Damon on another movie talking about it. He said it's like acting with a Cuisinart in your face. Chris, I mean, that's a huge challenge for you. How did you approach the, making production recordings with the IMAX camera? And then Brandon, I'm sure that kind of landed in your lap as well from a cleanup perspective.
Well, again, that was another thing, another one of these major challenges on this movie. It's like every single day, there was never a day where there wasn't something like insanely difficult for us to deal with on set. But it just it became normal for us. We got used to all these different things. And when it comes to the IMAX stuff, early on, when I found out about that we were going to actually shoot this movie with the IMAX cameras, I immediately remembered this scene. It was like a behind the scenes clip from the movie Nope. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that camera is like, how did they record dialogue with that? And, in that situation, I think my brain just assumed that you would have to use a lot of ADR. I think that's probably a typical way of approaching it. But we did benefit from the fact that a lot of the people that were working with us on Sinners had come off of the movie Oppenheimer with Christopher Nolan, and they had experience working with this camera, and they did have experience with dealing with this issue with sound. And Ryan tells me that their approach was that when you're shooting a wide shot, you would and you're using this camera, because typically you would want to use this camera for these big wide landscape shots. You would basically just shoot the shot, do your best to capture the sound as best as you can, and then once they're happy with the performance, they would do a sound only take, which is basically doing the exact same thing with the actors, and trying to break up the dialogue portion of it, and maybe the actions that they do as two separate elements. But you would just record it without the camera rolling, and the actors, they all knew that, they bought into this approach, and they knew that they had to really give their best to this performance, because this could be the sound for that particular shot. And it kind of evolved, as I was on set, I kept thinking, well, first of all, that was the approach originally. And once we got into the tight shots, the idea was we would switch to the System 65 camera, which is a much quieter, but still a noisy film camera. And we would do the dialogue and the close-ups with that camera. And so that was, okay, we moved along with that approach. And then that changed. Autumn and Ryan, they got really excited about how beautiful these shots were. They were seeing the dailies every day, and they just wanted to use it more. And it started to get to a point where there was one particular scene where we shot inside in a house with the IMAX camera, and the actors, I don't think they could hear themselves talking to one another. It was that incredibly loud, So it was like, I'm freaking out, because I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And so I remember we just stuck with the approach. We got the sound only takes. And I remember flagging it to Benny and Brandon and saying, what do you guys think? Because the picture editors were on set with us as well. And they were basically cutting up each individual word, syllable, whatever it took, and shifting them along the timeline to match the picture. And I saw it and I was like, this is really impressive. And I mean, these are the picture editors, so I imagine there's going to be a lot more attention to that detail when it comes time for the sound editors to get their hands on it. And Benny and Brandon chimed in that I believe you thought it was okay, that we were good. As we moved on, that wasn't enough for me. Like, I felt like we could do better than this. I'm listening to the ISO tracks as we're shooting some of these in these moments, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I know that the technology nowadays has gotten pretty good. I'm curious how good it can get. So I got my hands on Isotope RX and this program called Hush. And I started just trying to see from a perspective of being on set, not in the studio, but even if I could, get a sense for how good can this stuff work at cleaning up dialogue. And then I'd start to think, well, maybe if we put, instead of, again, going back to craft services and just kind of sitting back so that we're just only focused on the audio only takes, it's like, what if we pushed, the limits, put the microphone, in that spot that's closer to their voice, and work with the cameras to make sure we're not being seen on camera, but really just pushing the limits of where we can put those mics. And then it came to me that this is actually probably pretty usable. And then of course, once it got into the hands of the pros that were working with us, these guys here, they got their hands on it, and they really did all the magic to make it actually work.
Yeah. Chris did an incredible job, dealing with the two types of cicadas and the IMAX cameras and and the levels and the volumes of the IMAX cameras. I remember on First Temp, we were at the last scene with the vampires, and one of the cameras make multiple noises, and it was winding up like, and I thought it was sound design. It was so like, I'm like, guys, it's pretty loud. And like that, you have that. That's actually your dialogue. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, we're just fresh into it on the first temp. I'm like, oh my gosh, like how is this? You know, it can get really incredible. You know, I would say 90% of the film is production, probably 90% of it, maybe 95, and it has a little bit of denoising if some has a lot, you know, and it has just, you know, often they would go with those, you know, the sound only takes, but then they would go like, well, actually, we just like the performance of the one with the IMAX camera, and you have to deal with that, or it changes, you know, midstream in the, you know. So, you know, David Butler and Jason Freeman did an incredible job, like just making everything so consistent. So when I got the dialogue on the stage, you know, I often would do another level of denoising, and we just would do so many different levels of, you know, we used hush, and we used, you know, isotope was probably the heavy, you know, lifter here. But we use so many different denoisers. So we're just kind of shaving off as we go through it, trying to make this 24-hour day period. Of course, the cicadas are always happening when you don't want them to happen. So you have to remove those because it's a daytime or a nighttime scene or whatever when they're trying to shoot this, you know, film. But, you know, very little ADR, almost only for dialect is what we used ADR for. Maybe a couple scenes towards the end when we're in the river and it's just chaos, and the IMAX camera is just right there in our face. Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, Chris did an incredible job. Like he thought about when we're in the juke, like when to use mats and when not to use mats. You know, we want to hear the feet when they're dancing, but we don't want to hear the feet when they're on a dialogue scene. You know, they thought about each moment and what they were recording and why they were recording it. It was incredibly helpful.
All right, guys, we have to talk about the juke joint. So, I mean, obviously, I'm presuming that this was a constructed set on a sound stage. But from a sound design perspective, how did you approach that space? We spent a lot of time in the juke joint. It's got to serve a lot of different narrative purposes, but you've also got to make it seem like a really lively party that, I probably wouldn't have been invited to or welcome at, but I really would have loved to have been there. You know, for Steve and Benny, tell us about kind of the philosophical approach to the sound design of the juke joint and how you guys made that space.
Well, I could say that a good chunk of that is Benny going through and finding some of the sounds that David had recorded on set and building these stomps. The stomps were the main thing that was really a complicated thing. And Ludwig had put the equivalent of stomps in his music, which were basically like kick drums. And they sounded great, but they sounded very mechanical. So Benny and Felipe got together and made sure that the stomps that we were doing were in sync with the stomps that he had, so that I could bring in our kind of rough and edgy stuff that was from the juke, for the close-up shots or for places where we needed a little bit more like roughness to it. And I had a lot of subwoofer on it. And this is another one where, as I talked about the contrast, we start out very kind of realistic, and it gets a little bit more and more surreal and surreal and surreal. And then the sounds are getting bigger and bigger as we are kind of making our way into his head. And then once it came time to switch over and we were like digging into the montage, if you were watching me, you would just see my faders just went down. And it was like all music, and all Brandon panned every single instrument separately and every single character and thing that you saw on there separately. And I'll never forget, at one point, I kind of gave him a nudge and I pointed at the Atmos monitor, and you could see every single speaker was lit up, and they all were individual sounds. It wasn't like the whole mix was just blasting. So it was, and you get in his head that way. But the only way that works is if you start from a place of like reality. So to get surreal, you have to start real.
That's amazing. And you made me think that like we should offer some sort of like a prize, like whenever you guys like light up every potential object in an Atmos sound field, we should send you something like a special T-shirt or something. I don't know.
The person giving the award would get tired of going, the winner is Brandon Proctor again.
I mean, the juke, we kind of treated it like another character in the movie. It was, obviously this old drafty mill at the start that they transformed into this place where people could come and hang out and let loose and listen to blues. And so like from the effects side, we started the evening where it was just kind of dead and quiet, not very busy, a couple people here and there. And then just the idea was that as the night progressed, the party got bigger and bigger, until it was kind of climaxing at, during Pale Moon. And so there's a lot of different layers to it. I mean, Chris did a great job recording on set. We got a lot of wild body movement and foot movement. Foley did a lot of wild recording of people dancing at different cadences that I then layered up. We had tons of walla and crowd and loop group. They also recorded a bunch of wild takes of people yelling on set. A lot of background characters just talking or yelling out to Slim. There was just a ton that went into it. So we all brought all these things to the table, and then it took a huge amount of time of our final just to kind of sit down and say, okay, we're in this moment now. Because it's not the juke. It's not just like, obviously it's a party the whole time, but there are these moments where we kind of have these really more intimate moments. So, whether it's Mary and Stack talking, or Smoke and Sammy up in the rafters talking. We got to find ways to get out of the party so that we could be, in these intimate moments with them.
The juke is always happening. It never stops, so it's slowly filling with people. So it starts with, very little people, just the one, setting up the juke basically. And it continues to fill with like bodies, and the sound deadens a little bit. There's more feet, there's more shuffling, there's more dancing. It has to crescendo. So it's just a really slow, long build basically of this juke. And at one point, like, early on, we had so much music. There was more music than film, because the juke is always there's always somebody performing in the juke. So there's this music that we have to, and then of course there's score on top of that. So, we have to always figure out how to trade off between that and the score. And is it working? Is it, the dissonance sometimes helps you, sometimes it doesn't. But, with that is the loop group and the effects. And so how to kind of get in and out of that. But that juke, like a character, is almost its own, its own little film in a way. It's happening the entire time that these scenes are happening through it. So it does, there's always a performance in the background.
But Benny, I wanted to follow up on something that you just said, which was one of the things I really love about some of those sequences is, the intentionality that you guys had about, bringing things forward acoustically, but also pulling them back. You brought up a couple of those sequences that I'd made notes of. Like there's a great scene with Mary when she confronts Stack, and they're having this really meaningful conversation, and the sound effects and the ambiences kind of just fall away, and we're just hearing dialogue and music. And then again, you guys did that again in that sequence where Smoke tells Sammy not to become a musician. And it's this really impactful, emotional moment. But you guys take the track down to just the bare essentials. And I thought it was just really, it's a great mix job as much as anything else.
Well, the crazy thing is the one that you didn't mention, as Brandon brought up, we're building and we're building and we're building and we're building like the entire time. And as we get towards the end of Pale Moon, and I'm just like, okay, this is going to end. The music's going to end, and all the stomping and everything's going to end. And then I've got these gunshots, and somehow I have to make them more impactful than the crazy impactful music mix that Brandon had done. And so if you were to watch me, I'd just be like pushing and pushing the stomps and pushing the stomps. And then all of a sudden, gunfire. And it only worked the way it worked because of the build that Brandon was talking about.
Well, like you said, it was a huge mix job, and we had the benefit of having both Ryan and Ludwig with us on the stage during the last few days to kind of really work through these moments, because it's a delicate balance of getting out of, you got the live performances and with score coming in, and then you kind of just got to get in and out very carefully. And so we're fortunate that we have filmmakers that are interested in what we're doing and give us the time to do that.
Yeah, and Ludwig was so helpful in that as well. I mean, think about it. He's there from the get-go. He's there from the very, very beginning, as a producer and a composer. And he's there on set. So he knows all the, where all the cards, but he knows how he wants it to play. And so at the very end, he's helping us like, what if we, he would actually even change things structurally, musically, anything that could help us get in and out of these moments. And like, what if there's this one instrument or there's this one piece that could help us, bridge these moments so that it felt tasteful in a way that, that musically could help us push and get out of the effects and let just the dialogue and music take over. He was, a huge part of that.
When we were shooting that scene, those two scenes that you mentioned, that was something that, as a sound person, I'm thinking in terms of the space. We've got these actors that are having this intimate moment on a dance floor that's like 15, 20 feet from where these performers are supposed to be playing, and the music's supposed to be very loud. And so when they're having their rehearsal and they're talking very quietly, I went to Ryan and I asked, are you sure that, do you want them to bring their volume up as if they're speaking over this music? Or do we want this to be sort of like a sonic bubble where they're just in their world and you strip everything back? And he said, I want to go with that concept. And that again happened on that catwalk when he's talking to Miles too. And it was like, we kind of developed a shorthand, sonic bubble or realistic. And he said, sonic bubble. So it kind of helps when you've got that conversation early on. At that point, it's like, okay, let's break out every single rug that we have, every piece of foot foam, take off the shoes from the actors and all this stuff, because we know that at that point, it's got to be as quiet as we can make it.
Yeah, and in addition to all this too, Chris and Felipe, they did impulse responses of the juke. And so both the main area and the back room that we could then take and put the dialogue or the effects all in the same sonic world, essentially, so that, we have the production audio from the location. We have Foley that's now essentially going in the same Ferb environment. So it made everything kind of feel seamless as well.
We have to talk about, I think, what you guys refer to as the surreal montage sequence, the conjuring spirits from the past and the future. I mean, it is the show-stopping, moment of the film. It's like, the first time I saw it, I was just gobsmacked by Ryan's storytelling, just the courage and kind of taking that kind of narrative leap and doing this thing that, like, you might have thought, like, would this work? But it's just so perfect thematically. It's so important to the movie, and it just says so much about Ryan as a storyteller.
Somebody take me in your arms tonight. Somebody take me.
Just tell us about crafting the sound of that particular sequence, because it's also like, is it a 4-minute oneer? That's also, there's so much going on visually, sonically. You guys have to keep up with that. It must have been a huge focus of your time and energy.
I think we all had the same reaction, like kind of just being stunned in terms of, not really, for me, I just didn't know how to describe it. I loved it. And I was kind of, speechless. But again, this comes back to Ryan, taking, being bold and taking big swings. From the effects standpoint, this was obviously a big music moment, so we were kind of doing whatever we could to not mess it up. And we started by cutting, just kind of focusing on some of the tribal dancers, or we were very specific with anything we cut, and anything we cut in rhythm with music. But after one or two, temp mixes, Ryan just wanted to be in Sammy's head, and so it really just ended up being kind of effects and Foley kind of getting out of the way entirely, with the exception of a few moments. The tribal dancer that's doing the Zaoli dancing, where his feet are going crazy fast, and then of course the roof burning.
Yeah, at the end of the shoot, our last shoot day was a VFX plate shot of them burning the roof down. So it was like, any insert shots or anything that we needed had to be done before then, because after that, the place, wasn't going to be around. From a technical standpoint of shooting that scene, one of the things that's kind of unexpected if you're watching it is that was stitched together as well. That IMAX camera that they used for that shot on the Steadicam could only run for about 76 seconds, I want to say, before it ran out of film. And because it's such a long music piece and such a long camera move, it created some issues on set that we had to deal with. And that's another thing where Felipe and Ludwig being on set was such a vital part of the success of that shot working, because we had all these people choreographed. The choreographer had dancers doing what they were supposed to do in tandem with the props department that brings in the DJ booth and the turntable for the guy. So they're physically bringing these things in. It wasn't like a VFX trick or whatever. And he's moving all around the juke joint to reveal these different characters at the right time. And he's supposed to hit this mark of the piano. And that's when we would have our first cut. And all these things came together like really well. And they were all happy. Finally we were happy with that shot, and Ryan's ready to move on. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, like we got to that part late. And so because of that, it means that or I should say early. And because of that means that we have to add that time to the next take. And then if you do that again, then, eventually you're not going to be able to have enough film to make that entire move. And so Felipe and Ludwig were on set. They started thinking, well, we could just change this about the song and we can, and so he's literally like recomposing the music on set live as it's being done, which is, unfathomable. Like, we never have that luxury to have a composer on set making creative decisions about the music for a scene as it's happening. And I think it's only possible when you have your composer, who's also an executive producer and best friend with your director, that you can actually do that.
Because they were able to do the one or the long shot, it gave us a lot of freedoms to take big swings with the mix itself of the music.
Ryan sat with me and literally, blocked me through the entire shots to make sure I always knew where Sammy was in the room. So it's actually, accurate to what they filmed, on the day. So that pan of Sammy is exactly where he was in the entire place. So we made sure we did that. Everything is kind of precisionally done in that way. And then, we alluded earlier that, because every instrument is being panned, and we're using every Atmos speaker in the room. It was amazing. Like, every speaker was lit up in this. And because of, panning every instrument in Atmos, we had to make sure that it was balanced constantly, that it wasn't just, you're panning something to the right, something needs to pan to the left. Otherwise you feel, kind of too lopsided, but at the same time, you want to feel that pan. So, you don't want to just have it, be mush. So, because we're panning everything Atmos, we're actually getting point source specific, panning around the room, and which was incredibly helpful. So we used every speaker I possibly could. And at the same time, it was the right thing to do to actually pan every instrument in the room simultaneously. And it wasn't just taking one fader move and moving the whole room. It was taking choices, because I had everything stemmed out. I could take, the piano and do this thing, or, take the scratching and have it come around the, back left-hand side of us. And the camera's even kind of rotating. And because of its, massive, image, we could use the tops as well as, in the sides and the fronts and the wides. And it was kind of amazing to do. It was actually really, really fun. But also because of that, during the picture edit of this, and I was working on it, it was constantly changing, and Ludwig's never done. He always wants to get in there and do something, which is amazing. But, we're constantly having to update all these pans and volumes and stuff to work together. But that's also what made it fun.
Guys, you've been so generous with your time. Look, we could go for another hour. We didn't even get to the final showdown. There's so much more we could have talked about, but thank you guys so much for coming on the Dolby podcast today to talk to us about Sinners. It's an extraordinary achievement. Congratulations on getting shortlisted, and congratulations again on the work. It's just extraordinary.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn. Super appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Many thanks to Benny, Steve, Brandon, and Chris for joining us on the podcast today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Warner Brothers for helping put that conversation together and for providing the clips from the film. Be sure to check out Sinners. It's now streaming on HBO Max in glorious Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We will have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, especially as the 2026 Oscar race heats up, be sure you're subscribed to us here at Dolby Creator Talks. As we do every year, we will feature extended coverage with many of the nominees in several different categories for the 98th Academy Awards, live at the Dolby Theater on March 15th. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Kahn. Thanks for joining us.